low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dan, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 21st and 22nd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Starting off, the above-the-fold article, Court Rejects Trump's Tariffs. The 6-3 decision finds President exceeded powers. Trump says he has powerful options. By James Ramoser and Gavin Bade. Washington. President Trump's global tariffs are illegal, the Supreme Court ruled Friday, in a stinging repudiation of a signature White House initiative. The 6-3 decision, written by Chief Justice John Roberts, removes a diplomatic tool Trump has wielded to remake U.S. trade deals and collect tens of billions of dollars from companies importing foreign goods. The ruling didn't address if the government will have to pay back the tariff revenue it has collected. The court's silence on the issue created a scramble as companies looked to assert their rights, while Trump warned he had no plans to retreat and would impose a new global 10% tariff based on other legal authorities. "We're going forward," Trump said. "We'll be able to take in more money." It is the first time the Supreme Court has definitively struck down one of Trump's second-term policies. In other areas, the court's conservative majority has granted Trump latitude to deploy executive power in novel ways, but a majority, 3 conservatives and 3 liberals, said he went too far in enacting his most sweeping tariffs without clear authorization from Congress. The court rejected Trump's argument that a 1977 law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, implicitly authorized the tariffs. Had Congress intended to convey the distinct and extraordinary power to impose tariffs, it would have done so expressly, Roberts wrote. Accepting the administration's legal arguments, he wrote, would replace the long-standing executive-legislative collaboration over trade policy with unchecked presidential policymaking. 3 conservative justices, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Brett Kavanaugh, dissented. Kavanaugh said many laws have authorized presidents to impose tariffs and other import restrictions. The 1977 law, he wrote, merely allows the president to impose tariffs somewhat more efficiently to deal with foreign threats during national emergencies. Trump, in a news conference, called the decision terrible and ridiculous and said he was, quote, ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country, end quote. Their decision is incorrect, he said, but it doesn't matter because we have very powerful alternatives. The case involves 2 categories of tariffs. Trump, a Republican, imposed one category on virtually every country in the world, ostensibly to repair trade deficits. He imposed the other set of tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, saying those countries are responsible for the flow of illegal fentanyl into the U.S. The decision rebuffed an extraordinary public pressure campaign Trump had mounted against the court while it was weighing the case. The president claimed that a decision against the tariffs would be the biggest threat in history to U.S. national security and would literally destroy the United States of America. The administration does have other laws it can rely on to try to reenact the tariffs, but those laws have procedural constraints and might not allow tariffs as expansive as those the court struck down. The emergency economic law invoked by Trump was designed to address national security concerns and so was designed for flexibility and speed, said Everett Eisenstadt, deputy director of the National Economic Council in Trump's first term. Other statutory authorities are not as flexible. The president could also seek explicit authorization from Congress to reimpose the sweeping tariffs, a route that appears politically unlikely. Other smaller tariffs that Trump has enacted under different laws remain standing. It wasn't clear whether the administration will have to issue refunds to companies that have been paying tariffs. It could take months to hash that out in lower courts. Kavanaugh, in his dissent, said refunding tariffs already collected could be a mess, with significant consequences for the U.S. Treasury. Companies have already filed hundreds of protective lawsuits seeking to preserve their ability to claim refunds from the government for tariffs they have paid, in the event the court struck down the levies. While an ideological cross-section of justices agreed with the bottom-line ruling against the tariffs, they diverged on some of the reasoning. Roberts invoked the major questions doctrine, a legal principle that says Congress must use exceptionally clear language if it wants to delegate new powers to the executive branch on major political or economic issues. That sort of explicit language doesn't exist in the 1977 statute cited by the Trump administration, Roberts wrote. The statute authorizes the president to respond to unusual and extraordinary foreign threats by regulating the importation of goods, but it doesn't contain the words tariff or duty. Justices Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, both appointed by Trump during his first term, fully joined the Chief Justice's opinion. The court's Democratic appointed justices, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Kajani Brown Jackson, said the doctrine was unnecessary to resolve the case. Ordinary tools of statutory interpretation make clear Trump's tariffs are illegal, Kagan wrote in a concurring opinion. Kavanaugh, joined by Thomas and Alito, argued in dissent that the text of the 1977 statute did authorize the president to impose tariffs, because tariffs are a traditional and common tool to regulate importation. The tariffs before the court constituted a majority of Trump's duties. Over the next decade, the tariffs Trump imposed through his claims of emergency powers were expected to raise $1.5 trillion, according to the Tax Foundation, representing 70% of Trump's second-term tariffs. Trump imposed tariffs on Canada, China, and Mexico in February of 2025 for not doing enough, he claimed, to prevent fentanyl and other illegal drugs from crossing the border into the U.S. Then in April, on the day he dubbed Liberation Day, Trump announced a general 10% tariff on imports from virtually all countries and steeper levies on those the administration deemed to be bad actors in trade. Until Trump, no president had invoked the emergency powers law as a basis to impose tariffs. 3 different lower courts ruled the tariffs unlawful, including a specialized federal appeals court of national jurisdiction that said the emergency powers law didn't authorize tariffs of the magnitude Trump imposed. Inflation shows signs of heating up. The Fed's preferred gauge, the PCE price index, rose by 0.4% in December. By Matt Grossman. Key inflation metrics tracked by the Federal Reserve accelerated at the end of last year, underscoring why many Fed officials have turned cautious about supporting further interest rate cuts. The Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index increased by 0.4% in December after rising by 0.2% in November, the Commerce Department said Friday. That lifted the 12-month PCE inflation rate to 2.9%, up from 2.8% in November. Core PCE inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, ticked up to 3% in the 12 months through December from 2.8% a month earlier. The numbers are roughly in line with forecasts from analysts who can use other inflation metrics to forecast PCE inflation with great accuracy. The report also is more backward-looking than usual because last fall's government shutdown had caused cascading delays in the Bureau of Economic Analysis's publication calendar. But the figures point to one reason many Fed officials have been turning hesitant about easing their political stance further despite January's decline in Consumer Price Index, now at 2.4%. PCE inflation, not the CPI, is the metric against which the Fed gauges progress toward its 2% inflation target. And it has consistently hovered above that target for most of half a decade. Much of the time, PCE inflation tends to run cooler than CPI inflation, but for now, the pattern has reversed. That is in part because housing inflation, which has cooled steadily, plays a bigger part in the CPI calculation than in PCE's, UBS economist Alan Demeester had observed. Minutes from the Fed's January meeting, published Wednesday, showed that a contingent of Fed officials thinks that at 3.5% to 3.75%, the Fed's current rate target is near a neutral level that is no longer working to restrain economic growth in rising prices. At last month's Fed meeting, the minutes showed one set of officials urged the group to consider communicating going forward that rate increases may be as much a possibility as further cuts. The December PCE inflation numbers are unlikely to be very impactful for traders who are largely already focused on what the January PCE inflation reading will show when released March 13th. That will be the latest PCE data the Fed will have in hand at its policy meeting on March 17th and 18th. Using numbers available from the January CPI report, many economists are estimating that the January PCE data will show 12-month core inflation steady at 3.3% or even increasing to 3.1%. The report also showed that Americans' personal income rose by 0.3% in December, while their consumer spending increased by 0.4%. Consumer Moods Brighton survey finds Americans' assessment of the economy improved slightly in February, according to the University of Michigan's monthly survey, yet high prices continue to keep many on edge. The sentiment index rose to 56.6 this month, up from 56.4 in January, the survey reported. An initial February reading had shown sentiment climbing to 57.3. The economic mood has improved the most among people with higher incomes, education, and stock holdings. With their much stronger income prospects and investment portfolios, wealthier and higher income consumers feel better insulated from any possible risks in the economy, said Joanne Su, the survey's director. Expectations for inflation over the next year declined, and long-run inflation expectations held steady. Inflation expectations can be self-fulfilling. If investors and consumers anticipate higher prices, they may accelerate purchases and press for bigger raises. New home sales were mixed in late 2025. The rate of new home sales jumped in November but fell back slightly in December, according to a delayed report released by the Census Bureau and the Department of Housing and Urban Development on Friday. Sales of new single-family homes rose to 758,000 in November from 656,000 in October, and slipped to 745,000 in December. A consensus of economists polled by the Wall Street Journal expected 738,000 sales in December. The combined November and December reporting were originally scheduled for publication on December 23rd and January 27th. LA is next target for California teachers. Emboldened by statewide gains, union members back strike option by Douglas Belkin and Scott Calvert. Last week's teacher strike in San Francisco was a test of statewide union push that is raising tensions in school districts across California. The next big target, Los Angeles. A wave of teacher contracts is up for renegotiation now thanks to a strategy the unions implemented a few years ago to synchronize expiration dates. Dozens of California school districts are in talks, with some already at an impasse or in mediation. Teachers in Los Angeles, the country's second largest school district, have voted to authorize a strike, empowering union leaders to call for walkout if a deal isn't made. By coordinating negotiations with strike threats, the unions aim to push funding battles from local school boards to the state legislature, said David Goldberg, president of California's Teacher Association, a union representing 300,000 educators. This resets the power dynamic, Goldberg said. Teachers want higher wages and better health care benefits as the cost of living has jumped and student behavior has deteriorated since COVID. School districts say they are strapped. In San Francisco, school and union officials agreed to a tentative contract last week after a 4-day strike, the first there in nearly 50 years. The district agreed to an effective 5% pay raise over 2 years and fully funded healthcare benefits starting in 2027. The district said the benefits will cost more than $40 million a year. Enrollment at San Francisco Unified has been declining for decades and is projected to drop by about 12% by 2032, according to the district. Critics say the district has too many schools, teachers, and staff. The district faces a $100 million deficit and has cut hundreds of central office jobs and enacted early retirement incentives. It pays an equivalent of 19% of teacher salaries to the state pension fund. We stretched our resources to the limit to get this agreement done. We still have a long way ahead of us where difficult choices remain, said San Francisco Superintendent Maria Su. She didn't rule out layoffs or school closures, which she said have been on the table. The union says the district can't afford the proposed contract, which needs approval from both sides, and notes its leaders bargained for 11 months before calling a strike. If other school districts and unions are at a position of stalemate, I would hope that what just happened in San Francisco would be an inspiration, said Cassandra Curiel, president of the United Educators of San Francisco. In Los Angeles, the union and district have been negotiating for about a year toward a new contract. The prior pact expired last summer. Teachers want an immediate 16% jump in starting teacher pay to $80,000, with smaller increases for more experienced teachers, along with a 3% raise in the contract's second year. The district has countered with a 4.5% raise over 2 years, plus a one-time 1% bonus. Total enrollment in the district has fallen by about 20% since 2018-19 to just over 390,000 students, excluding independent charter schools, officials say. Over that span, the number of teachers has held at 25,500, while overall staffing has increased 15%. On Tuesday, the Los Angeles Unified School Board approved as many as 657 layoffs, concentrated in the district's central office. Superintendent Alberto Carvalho cited enrollment declines and the COVID-era hiring of 6,000 employees using cash infusions. At some point, we reached the breaking point, he said. The San Francisco strike sent an encouraging message to other educators, said Gloria Martinez, treasurer of the Los Angeles Teachers Union. Putting pressure on the district is always going to turn up additional funds, she said. I'm hoping the Los Angeles district is paying attention to what happened. Al Muratshuchi, who heads the California Assembly Education Committee, has twice introduced bills to lift teacher salaries by 50% at a cost exceeding $30 billion a year. He hopes the coordinated campaign will provide the political clout to pass the bill. These rolling teacher strikes have certainly elevated the awareness of the challenges our educators face, he said. The coordinated campaign in California takes a page from the organized labor in other industries, including autos and hotels, said Rebecca Javan, an associate professor of labor studies and employment relations at Rutgers University in New Jersey. The joint efforts increase leverage for workers by improving messaging and strengthening solidarity. Teachers and workers are more willing to strike because they are seeing other successful strikes, and that makes them feel like they could win something, Givon said. In Sacramento, teachers in the Natoma School District this month authorized a work stoppage after a year of failed negotiations. Their union joined the statewide campaign because they saw many of the problems they were fighting were shared by other districts, including rising housing prices and healthcare costs, said Nico Vaccaro, president of the Natomas Teachers Association. There are many stories of teachers working 2 or 3 jobs because they are trying to figure out how to pay for their health care and how they are going to make ends meet, Vaccaro said. Robin Castillo, Natomas' superintendent, is hopeful the state will direct more money to local districts, but condemns the union's campaign. We're very disappointed to see the CTA statewide strategy, she said. It seems to be disrupting collaborative, normally local-focusing bargaining that's always been part of our labor relations here in Natomas, and our students should not be used to make a political statement. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Turning to the world now, China's Xi purges his big brother. It's in quotes, big brother. Shock arrest consolidates one-man rule by Linling Wei. It was a bitterly cold, overcast winter day when China's senior-most general left for a meeting with hundreds of high-ranking Communist Party officials, including their leader Xi Jinping. General Zhang Zhujia never made it. Security personnel sent by Xi intercepted Zhang and en route to the gathering at the Central Party School in Beijing, said people close to the Chinese government decision-making. Securing the general in an undisclosed location, officers also raided Zhang's home and detained his son, a military researcher, the People said. Zhang's arrest on January 19th marked a stunning fall for a man whose political lineage and loyalty once made him the bedrock of the Chinese ruler's military flank. But it also represented something more profound for China. The consolidation of absolute power by Xi, asserting again his primacy over the world's second most powerful military. Zhang's downfall capped more than a decade of military purges that have sidelined dozens of high-ranking officers and cemented Xi's control. A childhood friend that Xi called his big brother, Zhang rose to prominence following the initial waves of dismissals, a move seen as placing a trusted ally at the helm of the military. Analysts said Zhang's ouster shows that even with totalitarian control, Xi is having trouble finding a leadership circle he can fully trust. The fall of Zhang Zhujia signals that Xi's one-man rule has reached a point where systemic trust, the belief that loyalty guarantees safety, has completely evaporated, said Mixin Pei, a professor at Claremont McKenna College in California, and the editor of the quarterly journal China Leadership Monitor. At this stage, he isn't ruling through a stable coalition anymore. Rather, he is relying on a circle of endless political purges to keep his grip on power. Unusual move. Days before Zhang's arrest, Xi had quietly appointed a new commander to lead the elite force responsible for the security of Beijing. He installed a trusted figure from Shanghai's armed police, breaking from the tradition of appointing an army officer. This unusual move, the people close to decision-making say, is aimed at ensuring the capital's defense is led by a figure personally beholden to Xi, rather than the military networks associated with the purged general. After Zhang disappeared, the Chinese leadership kept its military brass in the dark about why their most senior commander didn't attend the January 20th study session with Xi, a can't-miss event. Senior civilian party officials were briefed within 24 hours of his arrest, but the military high command didn't learn until a few hours before the news was broadcast to the world on January 24th. During a high-level military briefing that morning, Zhang was accused of leaking core technical data regarding China's nuclear weapons program to the U.S., the Wall Street Journal had previously reported. Other charges included forming political cliques, abusing his authority within the military commission, and accepting bribes to promote officials, the journal reported. The journal hasn't been able to independently verify these allegations. Party leaders have a history of tarring their enemies with allegations that may not be grounded in reality. A Chinese Defense Ministry spokesman warned against, quote, unfounded speculation, referring back to an official statement that the probe concerns violations of party discipline and state law. Xi began his most recent round of purges in the summer of 2023 after he watched his strategic partner, Russian President Vladimir Putin, suffer a direct challenge to his authority, a failed coup staged by his once trusted aide Yevgeny Prigozhin, the now dead operator of Wagner, the private army. For the party, according to the people close to its decision-making, the Russian experience served as a cautionary tale. Corruption worries. With Xi already worried about corruption undermining his country's fighting force, the people said, he appears to have concluded that military hardware alone is insufficient if it isn't backed by absolute political loyalty. As the son of a revolutionary elder, Xi began his career in a plum posting at the heart of the defense establishment. In 1979, the 26-year-old Xi was appointed as a personal secretary to Zheng Biao, then the Secretary General of the Central Military Commission, the decision-making body for the People's Liberation Army, and a close comrade of Xi's father. That early access gave Xi a front-row seat to the raw mechanics of military power and taught him that the commander who doesn't fully control the generals is a leader standing on quicksand. Upon rising to the party's top job in late 2012, Xi wasted no time in launching a sweeping overhaul of the military, driven by a conviction that it had been riddled with corruption and structurally ill-equipped for modern integrated warfare. He initiated an anti-graft purge and dismantled the military's top-heavy administrative fiefs in favor of centralized joint combat theater commands that report directly to the Central Military Commission, which he leads. More than a decade later, he has gone a step further. Since mid-2023, Xi has removed 5 of the Central Military Commission's 7 members. Rather than repopulating the body, he has left most seats vacant. On the same day Zhang was shoved aside, another commission member, General Liu Zhenli, was also placed under investigation. Today, the commission is made up of Xi, who is its chairman, and a general known less as a traditional warrior than as a political enforcer. These purges, analysts say, effectively have transformed the Central Military Commission from a decision-making body into a personal secretariat, cementing Xi as the sole arbiter of military power. Dennis Wilder, a former U.S. intelligence officer who has spent decades analyzing the Chinese military and Beijing's corridors of power, describes the ouster of Zhang as, quote, the most stunning development in Chinese politics since Xi has come to power. Wilder, now a professor at Georgetown University, notes that the fallout is far from over, as Zhang and other senior officers are likely being sweated in detention centers to produce confessions and reveal their wider patronage networks, suggesting a much deeper wave of political cleansing to come. In Xi's view, the people close to the decision-making say these networks represent a serious threat to his authority. The journal has reported that in a sign of the depth of the current probe, Xi has commissioned a task force to conduct a deep dive investigation into Zhang's tenure as commander of the Shenyang military region, one of China's most strategically sensitive and historically entrenched military hubs. Zhang's tenure in Shenyang spanned 5 years, from 2007 to 2012, a time when he built the kind of deep loyalties in the military ranks that Xi ultimately found untenable. The investigators have notably chosen to stay in local hotels in the city of Shenyang rather than military bases where Zhang would have a network of support. Chain of command. With an institutional vacuum at its highest ranks, the Chinese military is now struggling with how the chain of command functions, analysts inside and outside China say. Xi is more at risk of being insulated from professional military advice, just as the armed forces are building up their capabilities, increasing pressure on Taiwan. Zhang and Xi are both princelings whose fathers fought side by side in the 1940s civil war that forged modern China. When Xi, 72 years old, assumed the presidency, he effectively made Zhang, 75, the architect of his military vision. By elevating Zhang to the rank of #1 general in the 2022, even after he had passed the customary retirement age, Xi signaled that Zhang was the indispensable hand behind the military's modernization. As a battle-hardened veteran and a trusted confidant, Zhang played an instrumental role in helping Xi centralize power at the top. For years, he had been the primary guardian of Xi's China dream of national rejuvenation, serving as the bridge between the party's revolutionary past and its high-tech military future. John Xin, a former senior China analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency, who is now a fellow at the Brookings Institution, said Xi is stripping the high command down to its studs, demonstrating a total loss of patience with the military institution itself. As the investigations continue, the purges underscore a new, darker phase of Xi's tenure. Xin describes this as the ultimate demonstration of Xi's cold-bloodedness, proving he is willing to discard lifelong revolutionary ties to ensure the military lives up to his unforgiving standards. The specific reasons for Zhang's undoing remain shrouded in mystery. Official statements from the Ministry of National Defense and state media have avoided specifics, saying Zhang is under investigation for, quote, suspected serious violations of discipline and law, end quote. However, a flagship military editorial accused Zhang of having, quote, seriously trampled on and undermined the system of ultimate responsibility resting with the chairman, end quote. This rare phrasing suggests the arrest was in response to a perceived direct challenge to Xi's absolute command rather than routine graft. Nuclear secrets. The nuclear secrets allegations add a strategic twist, touching on China's battle readiness. Evidence of vulnerability surfaced in recent years through a series of reports by American researchers that detailed China's rapid nuclear expansion. Wilder, the former intelligence official, noted that the public exposure of roughly 300 new nuclear missile silos in western regions like Gansu and Xinjiang likely unsettled Beijing. This tension, he said, was compounded by subsequent U.S. intelligence reports alleging that widespread corruption had rendered some of these missiles non-functional, including claims of defective silo lids. Such reports likely made the Chinese leadership feel vulnerable and paranoid, Wilder said. Even if unproven, the alleged espionage charges serves a political function, reframing a power struggle as a matter of patriotism and foreclosing any narrative of Zhang as a, quote, loyal dissenter, wrote Song-Hyun Lee of the George H.W. Bush Foundation in a recent article published by the Lowy Institute in Sydney. The historical parallels to the era of Mao Zedong are unmistakable, Chinese historians say. They point to the 1971 fall of Lin Biao, who was dubbed the Invincible General for his crucial role in winning the Chinese Civil War. By 1970, Lin had become what many party insiders then called a second center of power. Mao grew paranoid about the military's devotion to Lin. That tension reached a breaking point in September 1971, when Lin allegedly attempted a botched coup before dying in a mysterious plane crash while fleeing to the Soviet Union. The downfall of both Lin and Jiang reflects a recurring pattern in which the person closest to the leader becomes the primary target of his suspicion. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A confident Kim embarks on a new era of defiance by Dazzle Yoon, Seoul. North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un kicked off his country's most important political event in half a decade with confidence, gearing up for an era of military expansion as a self-declared nuclear power. The Ninth Party Congress, where North Korea's leadership sets out its foreign policy and economic and military goals for the next 5 years, opened Thursday with a celebratory atmosphere. During the last Congress in 2021, a somber Kim admitted to economic failures, but this year Kim said he was filled with optimism. Kim said everything had changed since 2021, when North Korea faced sanctions, natural disasters, and the COVID pandemic. Pyongyang is now bolstered by expanded military capabilities and newfound diplomatic leverage. Never has there been such a period as this one, in which we achieved so great successes despite the severity of trials and difficulties, the 42-year-old dictator said in an opening address to the 5,000 delegates gathered in Pyongyang, according to a state media account. During the past 5 years, Kim has focused on expanding his military, vowed to never give up his nuclear weapons, and spurned President Trump's pitch to meet again. The Kim regime displayed 50 nuclear-capable rocket launchers as a present for a glorious Congress. Ahead of the opening event, state media reported, Kim operated a missile launcher as thousands of North Koreans waved national flags. Kim has said that the 600mm rockets could carry tactical nuclear warheads and strike anywhere in South Korea. The rockets had been introduced in 2019 and delivered to the North Korean military in December 2022. When this weapon is used, actually no force would be able to expect God's protection, Kim said. Ahead of the Congress, the Kim's regime also held rehearsals for a large military parade that is expected when the event concludes, and awarded homes to families of North Korean soldiers who were killed while fighting for Russia in Moscow's war with Ukraine. In 2021, Kim had presented weapons modernization goals, including developing tactical nuclear warheads and intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the U.S. Those aspirations have shown progress. North Korea has unveiled a range of nuclear delivery systems and shorter-range missiles that can target South Korea, Japan, and U.S. troops stationed in the allied countries. China and Russia have acted as North Korea's economic lifelines and diplomatic shields. Chinese and Russian officials sent congratulatory letters to Kim as the Party Congress opened, state media reported. Pyongyang signed a pact with Moscow in 2024, opening the way for weapons exports and troop deployment for the Ukraine war. Kim attended a military parade in Beijing last year aside Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. During the previous Congress, Pyongyang described Washington as its biggest main enemy. He then labeled South Korea as its principal enemy in January 2024. This year, Pyongyang could set new foreign policy objectives that determine whether Kim will engage with the U.S. Mass exodus after camp collapse. At least 15,000 people have fled detention facility, U.S. analyst says. By Jared Maslin and Dustin Voles. U.S. intelligence agencies have concluded that 15,000 to 20,000 people, including Islamic State affiliates, are at large in Syria after an exodus from a camp that held jihadists' families, U.S. officials familiar with the estimate said. Security experts have long warned that the wives of Islamic State fighters were effectively raising the next generation of militants at the sprawling Al-Hol facility. Security at the camp fell apart in recent weeks after Syria's government routed the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, which had guarded al-Hol for years, raising concerns about the release of people who might have been radicalized during the years held behind the razor wire. The size of a small city, the camp in Syria's East Desert at one point held more than 70,000 people after U.S.-backed forces destroyed what remained of Islamic State's self-proclaimed caliphate in Syria in 2019. At the end of 2025, more than 23,000 people were there, according to a report this week from the Pentagon's Inspector General. Most have left al-Hol after the Syrian government took control last month. Western diplomats in Damascus assessed that more than 20,000 people fled the camp in a matter of days earlier amid rioting and surge of escape attempts. A diplomat following the situation said only 300 to 400 families remained at the beginning of this week. The U.S. assessment attributes the escapes to mismanagement by Syria's government and a lack of assiduous custody of the security perimeter, the U.S. officials said. The Syrian government, led by former jihadist President Ahmad al-Sharaa, has acknowledged that many people left the camp for other parts of the country and says it plans to monitor any extremists and reintegrate them into society. It blamed the chaos on SDF troops, who it says abandoned the camp during the January offensive, leaving the facility unguarded for hours. The government said this week it was moving the last remaining families from the camp in Syria's remote borderlands with Iraq to another displacement camp in northwestern Syria, where the state has stronger infrastructure. Al-Hol's chaotic dissolution has renewed questions from U.S. government officials, lawmakers, and security analysts about the Trump administration's decision to rapidly offload counterterrorism efforts in Syria to the country's new leaders as America pulls its forces from the country. Sharaa ignored U.S. warnings not to proceed with his offensive, a lightning takeover that brought about the end of a Kurdish-controlled autonomous zone. The Pentagon's intelligence arm found that Sharaa's government has demonstrated the willingness to work with the U.S. to fight terrorist groups, but that the Damascus efforts are limited by a lack of trained, qualified personnel and the nascent state of security institutions, according to a report published on February 19th by the Department of Defense Inspector General. They have some sort of very limited experience and infrastructure set up for this, said Alexander McKeever, an independent analyst based in Damascus, but definitely not for 20,000 people. Envoy role, not sex, tripped up ex-prince, London. By Max Colchester, Margot Patrick, and David Luhau. London. In 2001, Prince Andrew retired from the active duty in the Royal Navy with a reputation as a war hero and something of a playboy. To keep the man eighth in line to the British throne gainfully employed, the UK government gave him a new job, Special Representative for International Trade and Investment. In the ensuing decade, files released by U.S. authorities indicated he shared confidential government reports with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. It was not allegations of sexual misconduct linked to his friendship with Epstein that appeared to be behind Andrew's arrest this week on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Andrew, stripped of his royal titles late last year, was released while police said they would continue the investigation. A picture of a shell-shocked looking Andrew after he left the police station was splashed on the front page of virtually every major British newspaper Friday. He is the first high-ranking royal to be arrested since the mid-1600s and completed the social downfall of a man once toasted as the late Queen Elizabeth II's favorite son and a dashing wartime helicopter pilot. Andrew hasn't commented on the allegations, and the police haven't detailed exactly what aspects of his time in office they are probing. But police previously said they were looking into reports that Andrew shared confidential government information while he was trade envoy. For years, Andrew has been dogged by his links to Epstein. In 2022, the ex-prince settled a lawsuit with Virginia Giuffre, who said she was trafficked by Epstein and abused by Andrew when she was 17 years old. That allegation, which Andrew has repeatedly denied and didn't admit to as part of his settlement, cost the prince his trade envoy job back in 2011. The recent disclosures in the Epstein files from the Justice Department included new information about other instances in which Epstein arranged to have women visit Andrew. The police said they are looking into allegations one woman was trafficked to the UK by Epstein to have a sexual encounter with the prince. But for now, the former prince's first brush with justice has come from a seemingly more mundane matter: the apparent forwarding of emails to Epstein in his role as Britain's trade pitchman. The files shine a light on the tail end of Andrew's time as trade envoy, painting a picture of a prince who seems to have regularly blurred the lines between his diplomatic role and personal interest. In late November 2010, following a trip to the Southeast Asia as a UK trade envoy, according to files released by the US government, Andrew forwarded to Epstein confidential reports on visits he conducted to Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen, China, sent to him by a government aide. Epstein had previously helped advise on whom the prince should meet during his trip to China, according to emails. The next month, those emails show, Andrew sent Epstein a confidential brief from a UK-led multilateral group in Afghanistan, the Provincial Reconstruction Team in Helmand Province, about international investment opportunities in Afghanistan. Andrew wrote to Epstein that he planned to offer the document to others in his network. Separately, according to documents, Andrew wrote to other contacts with information about UK government policies and his own insights on the leadership and operations of British companies that he had gleaned in his role. In July 2010, while acting as trade envoy, Andrew engaged in an email correspondence with Terence Allen, an investment banker based in the United Arab Emirates. During this exchange, Andrew shared details regarding the restructuring of the Royal Bank of Scotland, which was majority UK taxpayer-owned at the time, following its 2008 bailout, informing Allen that he had met with the chief executive of the bank and had been told that it wouldn't be selling a private banking operation it owned. Allen didn't respond to a message requesting comment. The exchange was also forwarded on to Epstein, as requested, Andrew wrote. That October, Andrew presented another opportunity for Epstein, according to the trove of emails. He said a banker friend who had taken over part of an Icelandic bank in Luxembourg to serve the ultra-rich was looking for clients, and said Epstein might want to introduce some people he knew from China. He agrees that the concentration should be on who pays whom and when, Andrew wrote to Epstein. Around the same time, a contact at a military fuel supplier in Central Asia asked Andrew to make introductions to British banks for a credit line. Andrew forwarded the request to Epstein, who sent it to Jess Staley at JP Morgan. Andrew also, according to emails, took steps to help Epstein connect with high-level officials in Libya while Andrew was on a trade visit there in November 2010. Staley didn't respond to comments or did not respond to a request for comments sent by his lawyer or to his lawyer. The lawyers said there is a high bar for securing charges for a conviction for misconduct while in office, a charge reserved for the most serious cases of public officials having willfully neglected the responsibilities or willfully abusing their position, said Andrew Banks at Stone King Law Firm in London. Andrew's predicament lays bare a fundamental weakness and contradiction in the foundations of the House of Windsor. While the monarch and his direct descendant have a clear path in life and are scions of great wealth, their extraneous siblings are often at a loss for what to do or how to fund their aristocratic lifestyles. Where Charles was sensitive and thoughtful, Andrew was macho, confident, and extroverted, wrote Andrew Lowy, who chronicled the prince's life in a recent book called Entitled. In the early 1980s, Andrew served as a Navy helicopter pilot during the Falklands War and returned to a cheering crowd in the UK. The prince was named as trade envoy during taking over from his relative, the Duke of Kent. However, the then Prince Charles had reservations about his brother taking on the position, according to palace officials. The then government of Tony Blair, however, pushed ahead. It's about being part of, for want of a better expression, the golf bag, Andrew once explained of his role in British diplomatic armory. Which club do you want to get out to play this particular shot? Tony Blair's offices didn't respond to a request for comment. Andrew became known for cultivating friendships among foreign leaders, including in countries widely seen as corrupt. In 2007, he sold a mansion, which was given to him as a wedding present by Queen Elizabeth II, to the son-in-law of the Kazakh president for £3 million, equivalent to $4 million, above the asking price, after it had sat unsold for years. The deal raised questions in the British press about whether Andrew offered anything in return for the purchase. The palace at the time denied wrongdoing. In 2009, a book by a former top aide to the Kazakh president, his son-in-law Rakat Aliyev, claimed the house purchase was an informal way to ensure the prince would act as an ally in giving advice about business in the UK or making introductions. Aliyev died by suicide in 2015. His hobnobbing with relatives of former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and Tunisia's ex-president Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali, who was ousted during a popular uprising, raised questions from concerned lawmakers in Britain's parliament. Diplomatic cables leaked by WikiLeaks show an American ambassador criticized the prince's remarks to businessmen during a lunch in Kyrgyzstan, during which Andrew slammed a British serious fraud office investigation into an arms deal with Saudi Arabia. Some British ambassadors, especially in countries with monarchies such as in the Middle East, welcomed the access the prince gave them. In terms of the return on investment to the UK, I would suggest that £500,000 is cheap at the price, Andrew told the Guardian newspaper in an interview in 2006 when quizzed about his expenses. Chris Bryant, who saw Andrew's travels up close as government minister for Europe, covering Russia, questioned the prince's inappropriate diplomatic relationships and wrote in 2011 that the royal tours were legendary, but not for the right reasons. The prince said the trade role helped explain why he had grown so close to Epstein. I was transitioning out of the Navy at the time. I was going to become the special representative for international trade and investment. So I wanted to know more about what was going on in the international business world, he told the BBC in 2019. Even as the scandals mounted, David Stern, a German businessman who worked closely with Epstein and acted as a liaison with Andrew, said that the prince's reputation in the job was sound. PA, Prince Andrew, good trade envoy or not? Business leaders say publicly yes, Stern wrote to Epstein in July 2010. Stern didn't return calls seeking comment. That crumbled when the allegations of Andrew's alleged sexual abuse were published in the tabloids. In 2011, the government announced Andrew would step back from the trade job. Buckingham Palace at the time said the Duke would continue to support business in the UK, adding that he will undertake trade engagement if requested. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition from the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Opinion. Declarations by Peggy Noonan. Rubio plays good cop to Vance's bad. When a major Trump administration official gives a speech in Europe to its gathered political and business elites and receives a standing ovation, you know something big happened. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's address to the Munich Security Conference last weekend had an intellectual presence and warmth not normally seen in the statements of his administration. In this, it was the opposite of Vice President J.D. Vance's speech to the conference last year. The difference in approach and emotional register seemed to imply something. Yet, the two speeches didn't diverge in policy. Mr. Rubio's marked a continuation. Yet, it had a different atmosphere, was more morally confident than Mr. Vance's, and though it carried a request and an ask to be understood, it betrayed something important. The White House thinks it has already won on the issue of Europe, and the job now is to give Europe a way to join in and agree. Mr. Rubio framed the Europe-U.S. alliance as something epic in human history, something proven. America came from Europe. We are part of each other. In recent decades, we have made grave political mistakes. We're naive about open borders and mass migration. Turned climate concerns into a cultish regime. Believed ties formed by trade and commerce alone would be stronger than nationhood. But we made these mistakes together. He wasn't accusing, but admitting and admitting mutual admission, inviting mutual admission. The U.S. and Europe belong together. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds nations can share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage. America's home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe. We aren't daddy, you are. Our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. But you must reacquaint yourself with the truth that Western civilization exists, is admirable, changed the world, and deserves your respect. It was here in Europe where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. Europe gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the scientific revolution. The continent produced the genius of Mozart and Beethoven, and it isn't narrow or xenophobic to feel pride in this. It is just self-respect without which you won't be able to continue in history. When Europe defends itself, it defends a great and noble civilization. And it defends America because we are of you. Our story began with an Italian explorer whose adventure into the great unknown discovered the New World. Our first colonies were built by English settlers to whom we owe not just the language we speak, but the whole of our political and legal system. Our frontiers were shaped by Scots-Irish, that proud and hardy clan from the hills of Ulster that gave us Davy Crockett and Mark Twain. Our great Midwestern heartland was built by German farmers and craftsmen who transformed empty plains. Our expansion into the interior followed the footsteps of French fur traders and explorers whose names, by the way, still adorn the street signs and town names of all across Mississippi Valley. Our horses, our ranches, our rodeos, the entire romance of the cowboy archetype, these were born in Spain. This was tender and not sweet because it was anchored in a particularity the audience needed to hear. A 50-year-old European diplomat whose understanding of history was shaped by the educational apparatus of the past 40 years may never have heard these things or known Americans actually think about them. Mr. Rubio's speech won't overnight alter the political predicates of Europe's elite, but the respect it showed gave them cover to begin to modify their views. He does have a point, as it would lead them to wonder how much his arguments might gain some purchase among their own electorates. The speech must have been a relief for European populists who have been put off by President Trump's imperialistic attitude on Greenland. We'll quickly compare Mr. Vance's speech last year. It was famously experienced by the audience as an affront. He presented himself as a callow young culture warrior prosecuting a case against old Europe. He scolded them. Once we fought the Cold War arm in arm against tyrannical forces that censored dissidents, that closed churches. Thank God they lost. Unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War winners. He spoke of the EU commissars who are leading the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values. They're restricting freedom of speech and religion. Bucking them up, he added wanly, I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. It is interesting that Mr. Vance's banalities always sound hostile as opposed to merely boring. He is an odd one. It is true and his own testimony that he wasn't born on the third base in terms of circumstances, but it is also true that in terms of natural gifts, a bright and ambitious man born in America in 1984, possessed of a hunger to rise and a means to satisfy it, hard work, meritocracy, personal social abilities that allowed him to befriend and be befriended. In that sense, and historically, he was at least born on first. It worked out for him. He became Vice President of the United States at the age of 40. So you'd think his primary emotional weather would consist of personal pride and deep gratitude. Instead, there is always about him in his public presentation an air of grievance, of resentment, and a feeling of superiority. If you were a little brighter, you'd see it my way. It is alienating, and you wonder what it is and whether it's genuine or just a way of publicly glomming onto the perceived grievances and resentments of his supporters. Maybe the difference in their speeches was an extension of good cop, bad cop. A year ago, bad cop Vance made accusations and slapped the perp around. A year later, good cop Rubio sees Europe increasing its contribution to the cost of defense, asking for help with Ukraine, experiencing a rising populist wave. The Trump administration won. The relationship has to be managed rather than challenged, and part of managing it is to give European leaders new arguments to agree with. Mr. Trump's policy with Europe has at this point a fully settled ideological core, a rejection of globalism and multiculturalism, restricted immigration, respect for nationalistic thinking. But its relationship with its allies isn't fully settled. It's unpredictable, a rebuke this day, and embrace the next, all depending on the moment and the speaker. This is its own power flex. European leaders can never know which COP is coming. A final point. Mr. Rubio's rhetorical sturdiness stands out as eloquent in an administration that has never given the impression it cares much about eloquence, that to do so would be sissy-ish and insincere. It is interesting that they've always been enormously vain about the originality of their policy insights. They're perceiving before others the rise of populism. But insights and thoughts are expressed in words. You'd think that to survive as an enduring political entity, they'd want to use them better. And letters to the editor. Artificial intelligence is an efficiency engine. Regarding Peggy Noonan's Brace Yourself for the AI Tsunami, Declarations, February 14th. I'm a regular reader of Miss Noonan's column and appreciate her commentary. This piece, however, struck me as more fearful of change than focused on opportunity. Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations, 1776, that prosperity follows efficient production. At its core, AI is an efficiency engine. It reduces friction in research, analysis, and communication. Historically, productivity gains rising living standards. Economies grow because we improve processes, not because we preserve inefficiencies. We've been here before. The automobile displaced wagon makers, yet Henry Ford's innovations made cars affordable, raised wages, and improved daily life. Horse-drawn buggies may have caused fewer traffic deaths, but cars transformed commerce and mobility. Safety standards, seatbelts, guardrails, and traffic laws evolved alongside adoption. AI will likely follow a similar arc. There's also a geopolitical reality. Those nations that best integrate AI will shape the future. If the U.S. hesitates, others won't. I use AI daily in my work. It enhances my judgment, enabling me to cross-check analysis and accelerate tasks that once took days. Disruption is real, but retreat isn't the answer. Stephen Edrington, Oakland, California. And Rahm Emanuel has a shot at the White House in 2028. In Democrats, you may already have lost the 2028 election, op-ed February 18th. Matthew Continetti lists several Democratic aspirants for our nation's top job and writes them all off. He leaves out, however, a most appealing prospect, Rahm Emanuel. Mr. Emanuel has the political chops and experience. He'd have Barack Obama's not insignificant support, and he'd appeal to independents, disaffected Republicans, and moderate Democrats. I'd like to see him on the debate stage. By Paul Hallman, Arlington, Virginia. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 21st, 22nd issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Dan. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability.